Welcome to our first viewer-submitted Clean Fair deck critique.
Yeah, this deck was submitted by Chris, or at least the name they gave us was Chris, and it is an Edgar Markov deck.
The goal and theme with this deck is Vampire Tribal Aristocrats, using Edgar's Eminence ability for plenty of bodies to power the Aristocrat / sacrifice effects that provide value, whether it's life gain, drain, draw, or pumping vampires. Now, they did not want the infinite combo of the Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond.
Yeah, kind of the infinite combo of an opponent loses a life, you gain a life, and whenever you gain life, an opponent loses a life. They didn't want that win con. So the requested changes that Chris wanted us to find is they wanted us to balance the deck and add more robust removal and protection.
As for the budget, he said no real limit, but also keep it sensible. So like no OG duels, anything like that.
Yeah. And this is Chris's pet deck that they've been working on for a while. And it's also their first self-built deck. So originally they over-focused on vampire creatures, which made their deck feel strong by turn 5 or 6, but it quickly ran out of steam later on. While they have made a bunch of tweaks themselves, they wanted our help with protecting their key win cons and finding effective threat removal as well. Alright Chris, so your first request was for us to balance your deck. And the first thing that we kind of noticed looking at it is you had a balance of the Aristocrat and the Tribal, but that was actually weakening your deck.
Well, and I think too, Edgar Markov does thrive more in a tribal-based setting, right? With your vampires, even when he attacks, for example, you put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. Now, with the vampires, you're not going to be wanting to sacrifice a 5/5 vampire to make an opponent lose 1, 2, or even 3 life, right? You're wanting to kind of swing in with those so you can deal a lot of damage. But we still respected your original theme and wanted to make sure that we kind of found cards that would work for your playstyle, not for what, we wanted it to turn into.
Yeah, as much as we would probably play Edgar Markov more just straight vampire tribal, we also know that isn't what you wanted us to fix for your deck.
Well, and it's fun to sometimes do something that's outside of the mold, and so I totally get it.
And so one of our main goals, too, was to keep the Aristocrat in there, but to either give you some more impactful, results. Because like Rebecca was saying, if you're sacrificing a 5/5 vampire token just so that you can gain 1 life and each opponent loses 1 life, you're getting a lot more value just having a 5/5 vampire token on the battlefield. And the other thing we would say is, it might sound kind of weird, but you'd probably be better off having a little bit more of an imbalance between either tribal or aristocrat being one more than the other. Because really, right now they're pretty close to balanced, but because of that, you're kind of losing out on the majority of the power from one of those specific playstyles.
So we're going to dive into the cards that we think you should remove from the deck. So first up we have is Bloodghast.
Yeah, and this card, really, it doesn't actually help you that much aside from just being a vampire. With Edgar Markov, you're wanting to be casting vampires, and Bloodghast has this landfall ability where whenever you put down a land, you can have it just enter the battlefield. You're not actually casting Bloodghast from your graveyard.
So it doesn't proc, it does not proc Edgar Markov's ability, which would not create you another vampire token.
Another token, yeah. And you did mention in your comments that you kind of went through and did a bunch of mana fixing to put in some cheaper vampires, and there's nothing wrong with that, but like a 2-cost... Exactly. A 2-cost vampire with this landfall ability just isn't actually helping your deck as much as you'd want it to.
Butcher of Malakir. Now, this one does kind of fit synonymously with the Aristocrat's effect. It is a little bit mana expensive, and that's why we took it out, because I'm like, there's more effective cards that do what you want it to do, like Dictate of Erebos, Grave Pact. Like, there's just better options than Butcher of Malakir.
Knight of the Ebon Legion. Again, we can understand this was a 1-cost vampire, pretty easy to get it out turn 1 and already have your army starting to build, but the rest of its abilities just don't really make it worth
Mm.
it to keep this card in.
Well, and a lot of times with aristocrats too, like you're pinging life, right? So it's like a little bit here, a little bit there, and you're whittling down your opponent's life totals as quickly as you can. But it's right that secondary ability. If you're pinging for like 2 or 3 damage for the turn, you're not putting the +1/+1 counter on the Knight of the Ebon Legion, and it's not really doing what you want it to do.
Oath Sworn Vampire. Now this one, you can cast it from your graveyard if you've gained life. The thing is though, you're only going to be able to do that on your turn. And the question is, would you rather, pay 2 mana just to cast Oathsworn Vampire out of your graveyard? Or would you rather use that 2 mana to do something else? Cast a vampire that is, really going to be more effective, improve your board state.
Or your win con pieces, right?
Yeah.
Like mana is a definite resource in this game, and so to have 2 mana constantly on each of your turns to cast another vampire, like you might not have enough mana to cast some of those bigger win con pieces.
Preacher of the Schism. Now this one, there was a little bit of a debate about because it does generate you tokens and it does let you draw cards. I personally was the one wanting to take this one out of the deck. I just feel like, the setup for it is kind of a hassle, personally. It's either you attack the player with the most life, or if you are the player with the most life, you get some benefit when you attack with Preacher of the Schism. But the payoffs that you get for that just wasn't enough for me to really keep it in here. I like at most in a game, I imagine, and Chris, you've played this deck a lot more than I have, obviously, so you can attest to this. I can only imagine really getting 3 or 4 uses out of Preacher of the Schism, whereas you could just cast a simple black card draw spell to gain the same amount of card draw, or there's plenty of other ways to get some better tokens on the battlefield.
The Meathook Massacre. Now this one I was not a huge fan of because it's pretty much essentially a board wipe for you. Now it's like, okay, well, you'd think it would totally work within the aristocratic synergy, but you really don't want to be losing all of like your aristocrat pieces just in one go. You kind of want to be proccing that.
Yeah, really the aristocrat payoff here is, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Whenever a creature an opponent dies, you gain 1 life. It's not really worth it. If you're paying enough mana for this to really be an effective board wipe, there's a good chance you could be taking out your own creatures, and those creatures would probably have a higher damage output just swinging with them than sacrificing them to the Meathook Massacre to deal 1 damage to each opponent, basically. Alright, Vampiric Rites. This one, again, we're taking out because it's just not a good enough payoff for your aristocratic tribal. You have to pay 2 mana and sacrifice a creature to gain 1 life and draw a card. Again, that 2 mana is probably going to be better spent just paying for a draw card or just finding some other more use for it.
Vanquisher's Banner. Now this one, right, it looks like it'd be pretty good, right? It's tribal based. The one thing though is I would say it's not as powerful as some other powerful cards like Banner of Kinship, right? If you're wanting to get like the Anthem effects, there's better Anthem effects for tribal. And as for like the secondary effect, which is card draw, again, like there's better card draw outlets that we've also kind of included in the deck that this one will just not feel nearly as impactful.
Yeah, this is still a great card, Chris. It's your call whether or not you remove any of these suggestions. And this card could still be good, but we just wanted to find some better pump for your vampire tribal.
If you go that direction.
Yeah. Exactly. And we've also added in a few more card draw options as well. So Vanquisher's Banner, you can take it or leave it, but we are going to give you some options for replacements.
Yes.
Alright, Vengeful Blood Witch. Now, Chris has 3 or 4 of these very similar effects. that whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life, and either each opponent loses a life or target opponent loses 1 life. Vengeful Blood Witch we are taking out because it is the least effective at doing that.
Well, and the thing that made me be like, okay, yeah, this needs to get out is the target opponent. I love Aristocrat cards that ping everybody because that'll give you more maximum value for a creature dying in this deck. And Vengeful Blood Witch just was not cutting it in that regard.
And if you know vampires and these kind of effects, Vengeful Blood Witch is the worst of this scenario because it's only whenever a creature you control dies. There's plenty of other cards like this that say whenever a creature dies. And Vengeful Blood Witch, like Rebecca said, only targets a single opponent, whereas there are plenty more of these cards that say each opponent loses 1 life.
Vicious Conquistador. Now this one is definitely a remove card. Again, yes, it is a cheap vampire and it would create a token, but its ability is not really great. I mean, whenever it attacks, each opponent loses 1 life. But here's the problem with it. Okay, assuming, let's say you have it in your hand turn 1, right? You have black mana, you put it out into the battlefield. It does not have haste. So assuming like it is only just a 1/2, you can probably only get like maybe 2 at maximum 3 life loss from each of your opponents before, I mean, it's an easy block. It has no other abilities.
Yeah, and really the big issue I have with Vicious Conquistador is if this card is not in your opening hand, it does not feel good to draw during any other stage of the game. Viscera Seer. Now, the Aristocrat payoff for this card just isn't worth it, and it really has the same issue as the previous card we talked about, where if Viscera Seer is not in your opening hand, it just feels bad to draw during any other part of the game.
Well, and the thing is, too, is like, honestly, with the aristocratic theme that we're going for, I mean, your vampires are 1/1s, so block with them, you know, you can have them die through means of combat or protecting yourself, you know, so again, assuming like that with this deck, you're not creating a crap ton of tokens, you're not, in comparison to other kind of aristocratic themed decks. So use them to your advantage and not like use it, this advantage is not nearly payoff enough.
Alright, Welcoming Vampire. Now, this one at first glance does seem really good for this deck. The issue is though, you're realistically only drawing 1 card with Welcoming Vampire per turn.
Each round.
Yeah. This deck doesn't really have a whole lot of ways to be casting vampires or creating tokens on your opponent's turns. So you're really only going to be drawing 1 card each round, like we said, with Welcoming Vampire.
So here are the recommended changes. Now we're going to start off with the Aristocrats theme first, and then we'll dive into the tribal. Descendants Fury. Now I really liked this one because again, right, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, right, you can go kind of look into your deck and find a vampire card and put it right onto the battlefield. Yes, it doesn't proc Edgar Markov's ability, Eminence ability. But I mean, you're pretty much wanting to use this to sacrifice a 1/1 vampire to get something that might be more useful onto the battlefield, one of your token pieces.
So Funeral Room and Awakening Hall. I am going to read this one because it is one of those room enchantments, so it's twisted sideways here. It says, first, Funeral Room. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. That's just basically an effect to replace the Vicious
Vengeful
Blood Witch. Yeah.
A lot more powerful.
Yeah. And again, it's just a slightly better version of that. And it also has the added benefit of the Awakening Hall. When you unlock this door, return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield.
It's a great aristocratic synergy with even just the first ability, but the second ability, right, if your key pieces, you know, your key creatures have left and gone to the battlefield, well, this can bring them all back.
Yeah, this can give you a good setup where if you're sacrificing creatures that aren't tokens to any effect, you can just pay the 8 mana, you know, later on in the game, of course, and bring all of your creatures back to the battlefield.
Just more fodder to use.
Alright, Ghost Lantern. So this one you can cast as an instant to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, which gives you another cast trigger for
Yeah.
Edgar. And then the other side of it is whenever a creature control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. This one again, it's to try and help give you a little bit more value for when you are sacrificing your tokens. Because again, if you have a 2/2 or a 3/3 vampire token, you're going to be getting more value just leaving that creature on the battlefield. But at least with Ghost Lantern, whenever a creature control dies, you can really start pumping up some of your big threatening vampires.
Norn's Wellspring. This one is a fantastic card with aristocratic strategy, right? Because, right, with aristocratic strategy, you're wanting creatures to die. Well, this one, whenever a creature you control dies, you scry one and you put a Noel counter on Wellspring. It also gives you the added benefit of drawing cards. Now, this one, again, like it's just, it does what Viscera Seer wants to do, but better.
Alright, the last one that we're going to recommend for the aristocrats is Sadistic Glee. Now this is a 1-cost enchantment that lets you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature anytime any creature is put into a graveyard. So this works with both your own creatures that you're sacrificing, but also whenever an opponent loses a creature, you get to pump up one of your own win cons.
Well, and honestly, I would put the +1/+1 counters on potentially even Edgar Markov himself. Just making sure that, like, again, with the tribal and aristocrat strategy, you want to have kind of some other win cons just from pinging life. So that way, if you're against, for example, a life gain deck, right, aristocrats would really struggle. But if you put these +1/+1 counters on, for example, Edgar Markov, you could potentially be swinging in for commander damage. Now, let's dive into the tribal section. Now, kind of what we were saying, Tribal does a lot more, I think, for this Edgar Markov deck than Aristocrats. But again, we're just going to give you both options depending on which direction that you would like to go.
And a lot of the vampires that we have here in the tribal, you've already included or seen most of the vampire tribal cards. So these ones, a lot of these are actually just suggestions for better vampires to include in your deck.
So first up we have is Anawan the Ruin Sage, right? It's just a great way of like forcing sacrifices for other people. Because again, not everybody that you're playing against is going to be running a vampire tribal deck. So
yeah. And one of the things you wanted us to help fix was some removal. So Anawan just helps give you some removal for some pesky creatures.
Banner of Kinship. Now, again, with this kind of, if you were to go more of that tribal theme, Banner of Kinship would be extremely powerful. Because, again, if you, let's say, hypothetically have 10 vampire creatures out on the board. Well, when this artifact enters, each creature would get +10/+10. And that alone could deal some crazy damage for your opponents.
Yeah, Banner of Kinship is going to be a little bit of a non-bow if you're trying to stick more with the aristocrats, because you're not wanting to, really pump up the creatures that you're intending to sacrifice. Blood Seeker. Now, this card is kind of honestly protection against some other either tribal decks or even other aristocrat decks. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under opponent's control, you can have that player lose 1 life. This card can kind of be a win con on its own.
Well, and again, with like, for example, go wide decks, like a bunch of token decks, if you're playing against other token decks, which that's a really popular common theme in MTG. So, yeah, you could potentially have somebody lose 10 life on their turn. I mean, it's just a really solid card. Cover of Darkness. Now, this one I love. It's actually in my Vren the Relentless, kind of aristocrats deck, similar. Where it's like creatures of the chosen type have fear. Now, this is really powerful because if you're pumping up these vampires and you're swinging in, I mean, a lot of times you might not be playing against only artifact creature decks or black creature decks. So, you could be dealing a lot of damage and they can't be blocked. So it's protection for you, but also lots of combat aggro type synergies.
Malakir Blood Witch. Now, this card is really great once you have a bunch of vampires out onto the battlefield. When she enters, she deals damage equal to the number of vampires you control to all of your opponents, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way.
I mean, if hypothetically, and it's not too hard to have about 10 vampire creature tokens, or not creature tokens, but creatures on the battlefield, well, that can really proc that ability. And also, it's a good way to save yourself in the regard of like gaining that life. Life is just a valuable resource, and this gives you a great mixture of both.
Yeah, it's not that you gain life equal to the number of vampires you control.
Or gain life equal to the life lost, so it's each opponent.
Yes, so if you deal 10 damage to each opponent, you're getting 30 life. Molten Echoes. Now this one is both tribal and aristocrat, because whenever you cast a creature of the chosen type, you create a token copy of it. Now that token will be exiled on your end step, but if you have some effective sacrifice outlets, you can sacrifice that token if nothing else.
Or I mean, hey, you know, honestly, even just straight up combat damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just swing in, and if it gets through, great. Find a way to sacrifice it at the end of that before it gets exiled. But if it dies, win-win.
Yeah.
Ruthless Lawbringer. I love this one because it is a great target removal card, right? So when it enters the battlefield, right, as you're casting it, you would then create a 1/1 vampire creature token. Well, if you don't have any other creatures on the board, you can sacrifice just that 1/1 vampire that Edgar's Eminence ability just created you to destroy another target non-land permanent. Now, this is really impactful because you can target creatures, you can target enchantments, artifacts, like a lot, something that might be really a big problem on the battlefield. You can just take care of it like that for pretty much a low cost.
Mm-hmm. Alright, Chris, so we do have a few Sorin Planeswalkers to suggest to you. Planeswalkers are kind of those cards where either you love them or you hate them, so take these at your leisure, Chris. The first one we want to recommend is Sorin Grim Nemesis. His +1 is just a little extra card draw and burn. His second ability is -X, is just a little bit of target removal, and then his ultimate ability just floods the board with vampire tokens.
I think that this one would go really well in either a tribal and a aristocrat. Specifically the ultimate ability, right? So if you went the more tribal theme, right, creating a ton of black vampire knight creature tokens with lifelink, if you can pump those up with shared animosity, banner of kinship, stuff like that, those vampires are going to look really scary very fast. Or it would also work with the aristocratic theme because, again, right, more bodies, right, more tokens to fuel the sacrifice aristocrat kind of synergies of like, when this creature dies, you gain life, an opponent loses life. If you have a ton of vampire knight creature tokens on the battlefield, that can just, you can proc that so many times. Sorin, Lord of Innistrad. Now, I really love this card, right, because it kind of gives a little bit of everything in the regard of like, creates you vampires, more vampires. Its -2 is that it kind of gives a little bit of pump to your vampires. And then its -6 ability is that you destroy 3 target creatures. That's really great target removal. And you get the added benefit of returning each card that was destroyed this way or put into the graveyard this way onto the battlefield under your control. It's just a mix of like removal and some fun theft. It's great. We did take a few card draw spells out of this deck, so we wanted to make sure that we refilled them with more powerful and more effective cards.
Yeah, and Chris already still has a decent amount of card draw in here, so these suggestions too could even just be, if you like one of these more than one of your current card draw cards, you can just do a 1-for-1 switch here.
First up is Corrupted Conviction. This one's great because, again, you're fueling the sacrifice strategy a little bit. You're sacrificing a creature, but you get to draw 2 cards for the cost of 1 swamp. It's a pretty good payoff.
Dark Prophecy. Again, this one is a great combo with an aristocratic playstyle. Whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. This one you do have to be a little bit careful of because it's not a May ability. You might end up accidentally taking yourself out of the game with this card.
Nazar the Velvet Fang. This one is really powerful because, again, it would go really well with the aristocratic synergy. Because with aristocrats, there's a lot of cards that have you gain life, or there's other cards in this deck that you create lifelink tokens. So this one is like whenever you gain life, you can put a feeding counter on him, and whenever he attacks, you may remove the 3 feeding counters, and you can draw 3 cards, but you lose 3 life. This is really powerful piece to just make sure that your hand is always staying full and really benefiting from your aristocrat synergy.
Yeah, and really the payoff is equal because you need to gain 3 life in order to put the 3 counters on him anyways. So when you then lose that 3 life, you're just going right back to where you started for 3 card draws.
Pact of the Serpent. This one's great because, again, you're going a vampire tribal deck, right? So you draw X cards, lose X life, where X is the number of, right, creatures of the chosen type, which is vampires. So for 3 mana cost, if you've got like 5 to 10 creatures out on the board right now, yes, you do have to lose that life, but if you need to find something in your deck, you're more likely to find it if you're able to draw 10 cards. That's a 10th of your deck.
Yeah, one thing you gotta remember in black decks is life is just another resource. So drawing, like Rebecca said, 10 cards, that to me is worth 10 life. So the 2 cards are Pitiless Carnage and Plumb the Forbidden. These cards, you sacrifice a number of creatures to draw that number of cards. The only real noticeable difference here is that Plumb the Forbidden is a 2-cost instant, and you also lose 1 life for each creature that you sacrifice this way. But aside from that, they're basically the same. Sacrifice creatures, draw cards.
Well, card draw is, again, sometimes maybe not, it's a very valuable resource to draw your cards. We have a 100-card deck for a reason, and we want to dive in to get those win con pieces out. These cards will help you find that. Trouble in Pairs. Now this one is, again, it's a more expensive card, but it's really powerful, so we understand why. Right, so it's like whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, or draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. Yeah, I mean, against like certain types of decks, you can easily be drawing a card on each person's turn, or at least like each of your opponent's turn is what I should say. It's really powerful in that regard.
One of the big fixes that you asked us to really look over was protection. So the next category is some recommended protection cards.
Achroma's Will. Now this one is a fantastic protection card. Not only, right, does it give your creatures indestructible and protection from all colors until end of turn, that alone is pretty powerful. But the fact that, like, it also buffs everybody in, like, flying, vigilance, double strike, lifelink, all of the above, like, it's just really useful. So you can either use this in a defensive form, but a lot of people like to use it in more of a aggressive form, right? Because if it gives protection, they can't be blocked.
Yeah, Achroma's Will, if you don't know it, it is one of the best cards in mono white. And They Shall Know No Fear. Kind of a long card name. This card, though, super simple. You choose a creature type, they get +1/+0, and indestructible.
Cauldron of Souls. This one's a great one because, again, it offers you recursion, right? Yes, they will enter the battlefield with -1/-1 counters, so it really wouldn't work with, again, tokens, but for your key vampire pieces, if they do die, having that recursion is really useful.
Yeah, this card was one of Zachary's suggestions. We had him look through this deck as well, and he has a vampire deck where he runs this card, and it works great with aristocrats too, because all you gotta do is just tap this, you can sack all of your vampires, have them come back, attack with Edgar Markov, and they're back to normal.
Back to normal. Drana and Limvala. I really love this card. I actually have it in multiple of my decks. And it's because it's great protection in the regard of protecting you from powerful activated abilities that your opponents control. There are lots of activated abilities that are really powerful in MTG. So the fact that not only do they shut down your opponent's activated abilities, but they have all the abilities of all creatures your opponents control of, activated abilities still. But that alone is really powerful.
Yeah, and this card has the added benefit of being a vampire, And it's protection because it can really shut down some decks' key win cons. Enduring Renewal. Now this one is not for everybody. It is kind of a fun card. You play with your hand revealed, and whenever a creature card leaves your battlefield from play, it goes back into your hand. But whenever you draw a creature card, that creature is discarded and does not go back to your hand. So this card could work good with some of the other recursion we've mentioned, and it also gives you that benefit of just constantly giving you recast triggers. But this one is kind of it's
yeah.
This one's
it's very.
It can be a lot of fun for some players to
and
play.
Maybe not fun for others.
Yeah, so we thought we'd throw it in here just to maybe tickle you a little bit, Chris. But this one, it is not necessarily a serious consideration. It's just, it can be a lot of fun to play with it.
Flawless Maneuver. This one is honestly just a super powerful protection spell. Because honestly, if you have your commander out, which most likely you will want to have your commander out anyways, you can pay this, or you can cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Right? It's a free pretty much protection spell.
I cannot tell you the number of times either a Holy Day or a
Fog
has won our games. I don't know if these cards are just like super underestimated as a whole, but just having the ability to prevent all combat damage for 1 mana,
it's really powerful.
It is seriously underestimated in a lot of play groups.
I know. I'm like, even like Fog, I think it's like a 15-cent card, and I'm like, I run Fog in so many of my decks because honestly, like, it's not what opponents are expecting, and 1 mana cost to pretty much save yourself potentially on a turn, worth it.
Yeah, I would argue that the majority of games are won through combat damage.
Make a Stand, I love this one. It's pretty much just like a budget-friendly version of And They Shall Know No Fear.
Pact Weapon. This card prevents you from losing the game. If it's equipped to a creature, you don't die for having 0 or less life. And it also gives you the added benefit of whenever the equipped creature attacks, you draw a card and pump up the creature. Scapegoat. This one is a bounce card, which can actually help fuel Edgar's Eminence ability. Because you're bouncing all of your creatures back to your hand, it will require you to recast and kind of rebuild your board state, but that's not always a bad thing with Edgar's Eminence ability.
Unbreakable Formation is pretty much just like Make a Stand, but it does have the extra added ability of, like, if you're casting it in your main phase, or you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature, and they gain Vigilance until end of turn. Now, again, you might not be wanting to cast this in your main phase, but if, hey, you know, it has that extra added benefit if you want it.
Yeah, it's a protective spell that can be used both offensively and defensively for some great impact. Vat of Rebirth is just another great recursion tool that works pretty effectively with the Aristocrat playstyle. It lets you pretty easily get out some of those more impactful creature cards that have gone to your graveyard. Alright, this next section of suggestions we're calling 1 for 1. So, Chris, you already have a pretty good base for removal cards in this deck. So these cards are really either just some suggestions for either trade-offs with those cards, depending on, you know, what you want to do. And there's also a few that could potentially be switched out with some other cards in your deck. These are just good options that you could switch around for some other cards in your deck already. Alright, the first 1-1 card we have here is a removal card. Abstruse Appropriation. It does cost a little bit more mana than a lot of the other removal cards, but it lets you exile a non-land permanent, and then you get to cast that card and use mana as though it were any color to cast it. So it's removal with a little baked-in theft.
Attrition. I really love this card because it synergizes so well with the deck. One is, right, you're creating a bunch of little tokens, right? 1/1 vampires. Well, when you pay the black mana, sacrifice a creature, which you would then sacrifice a 1/1 Eminence ability vampire creature token to destroy a target non-black creature. It deals with pesky creatures that your opponents have.
Yeah, this is basically just a removal engine. Whereas a bunch of the other removal you have in this deck is just a sorcery or an instant. This one lets you kind of keep that removal rolling. Feast of Blood is just a great vampire tribal removal. As long as you control 2 or more vampires, you can cast this spell to destroy target creature, gain 4 life.
Generous Gift. This one is a great, just standard, well-known white removal. I love it because, right, it's destroy target permanent. So it's not just creatures. You know, you can kind of deal with some other pesky problems that your opponents might throw your way.
Yeah, and a bunch of these 1-for-1, you know, exchanges are sorcery removals. This one is an instant. It does cost 3 mana, but like Rebecca said, it's pretty much any white deck runs this card.
Mm-hmm.
Grasp of Fate. Now there are a bunch of enchantments like this, and the added benefit of Grasp of Fate is you get to choose a permanent from each of your opponent's boards to exile beneath Grasp of Fate before it leaves the battlefield. This one you might want to consider who you're playing against. Enchantment removal isn't super common,
Yeah. But
but
it's not too hard to come by either.
yeah. So if you're playing against a few decks that you know do not run enchantment removal, this can shut down not only a single opponent, it can end up taking away some of the biggest win cons from each opponent.
Well, even just like the commanders. Like if like a lot of times with commander decks, we of course try to build around the commanders. So when the commander is exiled, even just if it's temporary, right? It's so useful to just shut them down for however many turns you can.
Yeah. Worst case scenario, you just shut down an opponent for 1 or 2 turns until you can find the removal for this card.
Harsh Mercy. This one is a really impactful card, right? It's only a 3 mana cost, but it allows you to, again, choose a creature type. Each player chooses a creature type, and then you destroy all creatures that aren't of the chosen types this way. Now, this one is a pro-tribal destruction spell, right? You're running vampire tribal, so your vampires will be safe, but your opponents might not be.
Legions to Ashes. This one, at worst, is just another exile target non-land permanent. At best, it is removal for an army of tokens. So whenever you cast it, you destroy a target permanent, and then all tokens with that same name are also destroyed. So again, you could just run this card for its basic just exile target permanent, but this could also be great.
It could be a lifesaver too. Against specific types of decks, stuff like Myriad or Copiers. There's a lot of types of decks that, creates token copies of specific creatures, for example. So it gives you the added benefit of like really shutting down like that type of playstyle.
Rite of Oblivion. It is pretty rare to find a 2 mana cost exile target non-land permanent spell, and this one has the added benefit of a flashback cost. So you get to cast this card twice.
Tragic Slip. Now you want to be playing this one when a creature has died for its morbid ability. It's really useful because, again, negative counters can counteract some kind of pesky, indestructible creatures that your opponents might have. This section is non-vampires. Now, all the creatures in your deck are vampires. These ones, if you want to include them, they're just a little bit of some extra utility to fit the theme of your deck. Ayara, First of Locthwain. This one's very useful because, again, it gives you card draw, plus it gives you a little bit of more life gain, life loss proccing for everybody.
Raid's Arisen Nightmare. Now this one again is kind of more that aristocratic play style where you can sacrifice any permanent and each opponent has to sacrifice a permanent of the same kind. If they can't, then you get to draw a card
and they lose 2 life.
And that player loses 2 life.
Pitiless Plunderer. This one's great, again, with that aristocratic synergy because you're having creatures enter the battlefield and you're wanting them to die. So this one gives you a benefit for when they do die. You create a treasure token, and mana, it helps you with, again, casting more vampires, so you create more bodies for the battlefield to die.
Priest of Forgotten Gods. This card gives you a little bit of everything. You tap it and you sacrifice 2 other creatures, and then you gain just a ton of benefits. Again, a little bit more value for your aristocratic playstyle.
Roaming Throne is great for a lot of tribal decks, and that's why we kind of included it here, right? It's right if a triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type would trigger, it triggers an additional time. So with Eminence ability, it is a triggered ability. So more vampires.
And Roaming Throne is technically a vampire, and it also adds the benefit. You have a bunch of those cards that say, whenever a creature dies, you gain 1 life, opponent loses 1 life. That would also trigger twice with Roaming Throne on the battlefield.
Species Specialist. This one's great because, again, you get to choose that creature type, and whenever a creature of the chosen type dies, you draw a card. Since you're wanting to be sacrificing and having things die, well, that's a lot of card draw for you.
Yeah, this is kind of an alternative to that other enchantment we recommended, because Species Specialist says you may draw a card, so there's not that threat that you're going to end up accidentally milling yourself out, but it's a non-vampire creature.
So this last section are actually creatures in your Maybeboard. We decided to bring them back because we really think that it would work well in the deck.
Yeah, so when Chris sent us this deck, he already had probably 40 to 50 cards in his Maybeboard that he had kind of sifted through. These are just a few of those suggestions.
Carmen Cruel Sky Marcher. This one's great because, again, it really utilizes the fact that you're sacrificing permanence. Helps you gain a little bit of life, but also the best part about it is that you can return a target permanent card with mana value less than or equal to Carmen's power from your graveyard to the battlefield when she attacks. Now, with this deck, right, what we were saying, that recursion, right, bringing pieces that have died back to the battlefield, really just kind of triggering that aristocratic strategy more and more.
Yeah. Plus the added benefit of just a little bit more bang for your buck when you're sacrificing permanents. Hopefully I'm not going to butcher the pronunciation on this one. I believe it is Clavieno, First of the Blessed, or if you're American, it would be
Clavileno.
Clavileno, First of the Blessed. This card lets you, whenever you attack, a vampire becomes a demon, and then whenever that vampire dies, it returns as a vampire demon token. Again, just
it's extra value.
Yeah.
Getting it like pretty much 2 for 1.
Yeah, feeling a little bit your aristocratic again, where if you sacrifice one of these vampires, you get the added benefit of having a token return to the battlefield.
And a draw.
And
a
a
free draw. Edgar Charmed Groom. I really like this one. Again, for the front side of it, right? It is a little bit of a tribal anthem. But when you flip it, right, when he does die, it just creates you more vampire creature tokens. And so overall, it's just a safe bet to just kind of make sure that you're feeling well-rounded.
Yeah, this one can fuel both your tribal and your aristocrat playstyle.
Vito, Fanatic of Alcazats. This one gives you a little bit more value for when you're sacrificing your permanents, right? Or in this case, creatures, right? You're gaining 2 life if it's the first time that it happened. You're having each opponent lose 2 life if it's the second time that happened. And then if it's the third time, it creates you another token. So it's kind of like MTG math. Die 2, get 1 free.
Alright, so that is it for our clean, fair critique of this Edgar Markov deck. And really, our goals with this is to give you some good options. So, we're not telling you these 12 cards you have to cut from your deck, and we're not saying, put all these in. Really, to make this deck feel a little bit more well-rounded, right now your aristocrat and vampire tribal,
like 50-50 almost.
It's about equal the number of cards for each. To make this deck, it seems a little bit counterintuitive that in order to balance this deck, it's going to actually help to have an imbalance of one of those. You either want to focus more...
Yeah, you need to do either one or the other, because if they both are together, then you're not really optimizing either strategy.
Yeah, kind of counter each other out a little bit. So they don't really combine as effectively as you would want. And I would just say, add in a few more of those more impactful aristocrat effects. Add in a few more of those better card draw engines. Any of the removal...
The removal protection's great.
Yeah. Throw in a few more protection cards. Again, we gave you 12 cards to remove. I would say maybe throw in, 3 or 4 protection,
Yeah.
some more impactful aristocrat triggers, or tribal, depending on how you decide to go with that. And then just a few more removal spells, or you can kind of, again, jump around with removal
yeah.
you already have.
Well, that is it for our Clean Fair critique. If you guys want to sign up and potentially have your deck critiqued, we're going to include the link down below. So fill out that form. If you have questions on that form, check out our first Clean Fair critique video, which was my Lawfield deck that really dives into really going into the form and all the information that we need for that. But thank you so much.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, leave Chris some suggestions down below in the comments of cards that you would put in your deck. If you have a great vampire deck, just some helpful tips would be great. And Chris's deck will also be in the description down below if you want to go check it out for yourself.
If you liked this video, like, comment, and subscribe to join the Ferris community in all of Magic the Gathering. Until next time, go Vampire Boys. I don't know.